Donald Trump is an admitted sexual assaulter.
I gotta use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the.
When 12 women emerged during the presidential campaign to say that Donald Trump had assaulted them, he immediately tried to scare them into backing down the way he always used to try to scare people before he got nuclear weapons.
Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign. Total fabrication. The events never happened. Never. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
And so that's what Bill O'Reilly did when Wendy Walsh told her story of sexual harassment by Bill O'Reilly. He threatened to sue her for defamation. Today, the president came down on the side of Bill O'Reilly. The president, of course, was not in the room during any of those encounters, which Wendy Walsh will be telling us about. She's going to join us later. And Donald Trump wasn't there for any of the encounters for which Fox News and Bill O'Reilly have paid $13 million in settlements to people who were left alone in a room with Bill O'Reilly. But today, in the New York Times, Donald Trump said, "I don't think Bill did anything wrong." And that sounds like an absolutely true statement from the President of the United States, who seemingly believes that sexual assault is a sport and not a crime. The President believes all of the worst things described by Bill O'Reilly's accusers are not wrong. Donald Trump doesn't think there's anything wrong with sexual harassment or sexual assault. And so today, an admitted sexual assaulter comes to the defense of a sexual harasser. And the defender did it, surrounded by all of his enablers in the Oval Office. Anna Marie Cox is back with us. And so when the president says, "I don't think Bill O'Reilly did anything wrong," he's telling the truth, isn't he?
He probably is. You know, it's actually Sexual Violence Awareness and Prevention Month in April.
Which was announced by the White House.
Yeah, it was. You know, I think he didn't realize there's a prevention part of the title. I think he just thinks it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and it's sort of like Black History Month, where you promote it, you know. I just want to say, so between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 women is sexually harassed in the workplace. Only 1 in 4 actually report it. And I also want to say that for people like me who've been through it to one degree or another, seeing this happen sort of in real time is incredibly upsetting. I don't like the word triggering. I like the word enraging. And I just want to say that for people out there who may have gone through this, there is help. There are people you can talk to. RAINN has the National Sexual Assault Hotline, which is 1-800-656-HOPE. And you can go online to rainn.org, and they have an anonymous chat where you can be in touch with people who know what it's like and who can talk you through it. You don't have to go through this alone.
1-800-656-HOPE. And Wendy Walsh today called the Fox News hotline to report Bill O'Reilly. She's going to show us some of the video of that. And we smile because the alternative is we need Kleenex, and this is TV, and
or rage.
Yeah,
rage is also the
yeah. No, I find it absolutely enraging, and this just vile defense of his that this happens to everybody who is well known, who has a lot of money. Okay, show me all the complaints against Sean Hannity. Show me all the complaints against Tucker Carlson. I've never heard a word about any of that.
You know, apparently that 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 women that experience sexual assault in the workplace, they all worked for Bill O'Reilly. Yeah, every single one of them. So
Anna Marie Cox, thank you for that. 1-800-656-HOPE. Thank you. Coming up, Wendy Walsh will join us. She did not take a financial settlement from Bill O'Reilly, and that means she is free to speak. We have some breaking news at this hour. Donald Trump is saying that, quote, the Russia story is a total hoax. He's told that in the New York Times interview today. Today, a spokesperson for former National Security Advisor Susan Rice issued a statement saying, "I'm not going to dignify the president's ludicrous charge with a comment. Unfortunately, I cannot be so careful with my dignity, and so we will now comment on the president's ludicrous charge of the day." President Trump said this about Susan Rice in an interview with the New York Times. "I think it's one of the biggest stories. The Russia story is a total hoax. There has been absolutely nothing coming out of that, but what various things led into it was the story that we're talking about, the Susan Rice." That's hard stuff to read, since it isn't really English. "What's happened is terrible. I think it's truly one of the big stories of our time." When asked if he thinks Susan Rice committed a crime, the President of the United States said, "I can't comment on that." Oh, no, wait. He said, "Do I think? Yes, I think." Joining us now, Anna Marie Cox, MTV News senior political correspondent and host of the podcast With Friends Like These. Also joining us is Navid Jamali, a former FBI intelligence operative and MSNBC contributor and author of How to Catch a Russian Spy. Earlier today, he testified at the House Intelligence Committee members' hearing on Russian influence on the campaign. And Navid, I just want to go to that. It was a closed-door hearing, but you can reveal to us your part, what you had to say in that hearing according to their rules. Isn't that the way it works?
Yes, yeah, and that's exactly right,
So
Lawrence.
tell us about that.
Well, first of all, I'm sort of flabbergasted that while I was talking about Russia, the statement by the president comes out saying that this whole thing is a hoax.
Well, not just that it's a hoax, but he has tried in his head and convicted Susan Rice in his head of a crime that he refuses to specify.
Look, well, what I was talking about today was very specifically that, when it comes to how Russians target U.S. persons, and more importantly, which is a story that I lived, I worked undercover over 3 years for the FBI against the Russians in New York. What I told the HIPC members was that I see echoes in 2016 to what the Russians did with me. And I thought that this, from a tactical standpoint, understanding how the Russians operate, how they recruit people, why they recruit people, how that works, is something that is of huge interest, especially when you look at this, that this is a threat that is ongoing, and it's not just Russia that was emboldened by 2016, it's China, it's Iran, and that was essentially the emphasis of my brief, and I think it was well received. But it is frustrating to have this talk, and on the other hand, the president making these comments about Rice and Russia as a whole.
Anna, I kind of love the reply that I'm not going to dignify it, not going to dignify the accusation with a comment, and yet here we are stuck again. A madman says something that everyone knows he's making up as he says it. He says it to the New York Times. The madman's president of the United States, and so here we are.
It sort of leaves us who talk for a living speechless. We are dignifying it with a response, which is unfortunate. I mean, that's what I keep thinking about as you talk to Navid, which is that we have to talk about this. We shouldn't even have to be talking about this.
Yes.
We should be talking about Russia. We should be talking about the emoluments clause. We should be talking about Jared Kushner's immense portfolio that he did nothing to deserve. We should be there's so many things should be.
But what we are talking about within this is the lie the president told today to try to deal with the fact that he and his administration, his transition team, his campaign are being investigated for their possible connections to Russia during the election and how that might have influenced the election.
And more than that, how they were manipulated.
Yes.
Right, which is what Navid was talking about. Which is that we also had testimony to the effect that the Russians explicitly target Trump with conspiracy theories when they know he's online, right? This sort of sounds like could be something like that. I mean, what is this? It's astonishing, and it's astonishing. We need to talk about this in order to draw it back to the Russians, and we need to talk about this because this is something your first guest talked about too. It means something that we cannot trust the president of the United States. That has ramifications for our democracy. That internationally and domestically, that we cannot take him at his word. And I don't know if we've quite figured out as a country and how to grapple with that, quite frankly.
Navid, every serious intelligence community professional that I've heard talk about this, including Michael Hayden, have said, slow down, unmasking names in these reports is Susan Wright's job. She's supposed to do that. She's only allowed to do that if the agency involved thinks that it should be done. It's not up to her if the name gets unmasked. We've all been taught these rules this week, which most of us didn't know last week, and we haven't been able to find anyone with real intelligence experience who has a problem with this. At the same time, people like Lindsey Graham and other Republicans who've been pretty good on this issue of the Russian interference, as soon as they heard the two words Susan Rice, they were suspicious. And nothing had taken them off the scent until they heard the words Susan Rice. And suddenly they think that needs to be investigated.
Yeah, this is such smoke and mirrors, such deflection. You know, it goes back to even Executive Order 12333. At the core of this, Lawrence, the U.S. intelligence community does not collect on U.S. persons. And the fact that our president doesn't understand that and yet keeps looking for more creative ways to bring this claim back, whether it's first President Obama, now it's Susan Rice. I mean, it is absurd. There's just no evidence of this. And look, you know, it's not just Susan Rice, just to be clear, that would have had to do this. There's a whole host of people that go in and actually make the change. For them to agree to an illegal order like that, it just would never happen. And yet we have this president that, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, in fact of all the doctrine and laws that prohibit this, continues to make these claims. It is, you know, and then of course, no mention of Russia, nothing about Russia. And I don't know exactly how we address this other than to say exactly what you've been saying, which is, this is crazy.
Quickly before we go, lock her up. Hillary Clinton, they've never said lock him up. Even after President Obama was accused of a crime by President Trump, no one said lock him up. I got a call today from a friend who said, Susan Rice, they want to go after her. Is it because she's a woman? Having lock her up as an echo to all of this. And I said, I'm going to ask Anna Marie Cox.
Well, there does seem to be a certain pattern. And it's true. I mean, I think that it might have to do with Trump's conceptions of power. I think that he assumes that men are powerful and that when he sees a woman in power, he's immediately suspicious. She didn't earn it. He also had the same problem with not really believing that Obama earned his power, what with the birther stuff. I always have trouble with words on your show, censoring myself. But I do think that he's innately suspicious of women who have power. He thinks they don't deserve it, and through some nefarious means.
So stuff was your censor word that you used.
Stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Naveed Jamali, thank you very much for joining us. Anna Marie, we're going to need you for a later segment here. Coming up, Donald Trump, of course, no surprise, defended Bill O'Reilly on the sexual harassment charges today, saying Bill O'Reilly didn't do anything wrong. Men, women, children, and babies got gassed in Syria this week because last week the Trump administration gave the signal that that was okay with President Trump. That's the signal that they gave. The Trump administration is populated by the worst amateurs in the history of American government, very much including the most untrained and inept Secretary of State in modern history. Having the boss of Exxon become Secretary of State was a cartoonish notion of Republican governance until now. And last week, Rex Tillerson said the most dangerous and irresponsible thing that he could have said, given the state of the world today.
President Assad, should he stay or should he go?
I think the status and the longer term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people.
Decided by the Syrian people. That is a dramatic turn from the Obama administration position that Assad must go. Decided by the Syrian people, by which Rex Tillerson means the nearly 5 million people who have fled the country to save their lives. Does he mean it should be decided by the 6.5 million people who have fled their homes in Syria but are somewhere still in and around Syria, people who presumably would need absentee ballots in the fantasy election that the horrifyingly dim Rex Tillerson was imagining last week? You saw in that comment why Rex Tillerson doesn't like to speak publicly. Rex Tillerson is as clueless as Donald Trump. The difference is that Rex Tillerson knows that. Rex Tillerson is just smart enough to know where his ignorance begins. which is everywhere in the world, unless it's about making a deal to extract oil. The news media has been far too patient with the silence of Rex Tillerson, and apparently far too busy to have spent much time on the abjectly immoral idiocy that did come out of his mouth last week, decided by the Syrian people. Last week, that statement included all of the people who were gassed this week and killed. But now it doesn't. President Assad doesn't have to worry about how those people would vote in Rex Tillerson's imaginary Syrian election that would be decided by the Syrian people. What is so profoundly immoral about what Rex Tillerson had to say last week is that he has been so lazy in his approach to his new job, so lazy that he might not have understood that President Assad would take that statement as America's official okay, that he can now do whatever he wants because the United States is perfectly okay with this murderous madman remaining as the president of Syria. Now let's just hope, I really mean this, let's just hope that Rex Tillerson is too much of an amateur to have understood that what he said in diplomatic speak was code language for unleash the gas. Because if Rex Tillerson did understand what he was saying, then he would be a war criminal. Everything Donald Trump has ever said about President Assad has been a signal for Assad to go on killing as many people as he felt like killing that day, any way he wanted to kill them, with or without gas.
I've been looking at the different players, and I've been watching Assad, and I've been pretty good at this stuff over the years because deals are people. And I'm looking at Assad and saying, maybe he's better than the kind of people that we're supposed to be backing.
He was looking at the different players who were trying to kill each other. And he decided that he would come down on the side of President Assad and cheer him on in his killing spree. Someone in the Trump administration has found a way to explain at least some of this to Donald Trump, which is why he said things like this today.
When you kill innocent children, innocent babies, little babies, with a chemical gas that is so lethal, people were shocked to hear what gas it was. That crosses many, many lines, beyond a red line, many, many lines.
Of course, no questioner could get Donald Trump to say what he would do about those crossed lines. Instead, he just talked about his flexibility.
I like to think of myself as a very flexible person. I don't have to have one specific way, and if the world changes, I go the same way. I don't change. Well, I do change. And I am flexible, and I'm proud of that flexibility. And I will tell you, that attack on children yesterday had a big impact on me. Big impact. That was a horrible, horrible thing.
Big impact? We have no idea what the big impact was. Changed him? We have no idea how it changed him. He is as lost as Rex Tillerson. Neither one of them have any idea what to do or say about this. Trump voters were told that this kind of thing would magically stop happening in the world on January 20th, when Donald Trump took the oath of office. The world has noticed that Donald Trump is president, and in Syria, that means the return of chemical weapons. And it means that Donald Trump's best friend during the campaign, Vladimir Putin, continues to do everything he can to preserve Assad's position in Syria.
Look at those pictures. We cannot close our eyes to those pictures. Yesterday's attack bears all the hallmarks of the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons. Russia for this. In fact, if Russia had been fulfilling its responsibility, there would not even be any chemical weapons left for the Syrian regime to use.
Now there, to the United Nations, who understood at least today that she does the United States, she works for the United States. Nikki Haley said more wise and helpful things at the United Nations today than Donald Trump has in his entire life, and clearly more than our Secretary of State ever will. If you've been watching presidential administrations for a while, you might be ready to bet, as am I, that Rex Tillerson is going to be the first person out the door in the Trump cabinet. It's thought that he's not as smart as Rick Perry, who will be able to outlast him at the Energy Department. It's that Rex Tillerson's in the job where you ape crisis. And Rex Tillerson is lost in that job that is surrounded by crisis every day. He actually issued a statement about the crisis with North Korea, saying, "The United States has spoken enough. We have no further comment." And that statement now goes straight to the top of the stack of stupidest things ever said by a Secretary of State. And most don't have any entries in the stupidest things ever said file. As long as Secretary of State and is advising the president, watching the morally blind, the morally blind. Joining us now, David Corn, Washington Bureau Chief for Mother Jones and an MSNBC political analyst. Also with us, Max Boot, Senior Fellow for National Security Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and a former defense policy advisor for Romney 2012. David Corn, Rachel has been watching how Rex Tillerson has basically never been saying a word. He famously pressed with him on that foreign trip where he brought just one reporter, and he's stayed very, very quiet. We look back at it, we might just hope for, as long as he's there, maybe him saying nothing is better. President Assad, as he did last week, once. Because that is, of course, up to...
Well, I think Rex Tillerson's big Donald Trump. There is no policy. I mean, if you want to be a little bit sympathetic to Rex Tillerson, I know you don't want to be, Lawrence, but if you do, you say, what should he be saying when the boss isn't saying anything? That press conference today, what did Trump do? He made it about himself. What are you going to do to deal with this, crime and tough issue? I'm not sure I know what I would advise. But what would you do, Mr. President? Well, let me talk about myself now. I'm flexible. Let me tell you how this has impacted me, because I didn't know there were such things going on in Syria. I mean, the amount of ignorance, egotism displayed in really about 30 set a presidential record already into this administration. So I feel almost a little sympathy for Rex Tillerson. What to say? Nikki Haley decided to say what she said on her own, but none of that is integrated with what the White House will or won't do. So, it's all, and the guy at the charge only cares about one thing, himself.
And Max, when you have a president who doesn't have a position, which is not common on most issues, the strong people in administration do have a position, and they, especially because no one's telling them not to. And that's what you saw at the United Nations today. You saw a UN ambassador who stood up and said, this is what I think, and this is what I believe the United States should represent here. And she didn't have to check with Rex Tillerson. Why can't Rex Tillerson sound like Nikki Haley?
Well, I think, Lawrence, I wouldn't be quite so hard on Tillerson as you have been, but I will say that he's got a steep learning curve. He clearly doesn't know the job. CEO of ExxonMobil translates into being Secretary of State, has had a rude awakening. But I think the fundamental problem, I think you just put your finger on it, there is no foreign policy in this administration. It is not clear who speaks for the United States government. And so you have people like Nikki Haley, who gives a very eloquent statement, but is she really speaking for the United States government? The weird thing here is that even Donald Trump, the president of the United States, may not necessarily speak for the United States government. I mean, in any previous administration, when you have the president say something, that's it. That's the law. That's the policy. The president. But in this administration, Donald Trump says stuff all the time, and then he doesn't act on it. He doesn't follow it up. So is the stuff that he says actually going to be implemented? Like today, for example, where he said that Syria had finally crossed some kind of line, which is, I'm sitting here saying, wait a second, this is like the 10,000th atrocity policy which has been committed by Assad. This is not the first use of poison gas. This is not the first time that kids have been killed. Donald is in the past, but now they've crossed some kind of line. Well, okay, so what are you going to do about it? And there's no clear indication of that. Maybe they'll do something, maybe they don't. But I've never seen, Lawrence, an administration where the words of the principles and of the press are so divorced from the actual policy and actions, which just are not there.
David, what I thought I saw in a very smart political operative, she was just placing the frame around this story, and one of the frames she was placing around it is, this is Russia. This is Russia at work. This is Vladimir Putin at work. And and it's now up to Donald Trump to go contradict her on that. Donald Trump wouldn't dare mention Vladimir in relation to Syria, but Nikki Haley did a flawless job of framing this in terms of Vladimir Putin's support for all of this that Assad does.
You're right, but I think I'll disagree with you a little bit. It's not about whether Donald Trump contradicts her or not. You know, I can see him, or more importantly, I can see Putin looking at that and saying, let her say what she wants to say. She doesn't have power. She's not Donald Trump. If Donald Trump, it's not about contradicting her. If he doesn't back her up, if he doesn't say the same thing, and if he doesn't take any action to marginalize Putin and to point out this is one of the reasons why someone like Max Boot and myself, who for years have not agreed on anything, can agree on this, you know, that it really doesn't matter what Nikki Haley says, other than she has bragging rights. She can say she took a good line, she can write this in her book, she can write op-eds, but if, you know, Donald Trump doesn't follow suit, look at this and say, I see where power is, I don't care what an ambassador of the UN says.
I think any former ambassador of the UN would tell you that the way it works in that building is it does indeed matter what the U.S. ambassador says every time the U.S. ambassador speaks. Now, what we're talking about is something else, which is the question of what does it mean in terms of what the United States is going to do next. That's a different issue. It's always been a different issue, in fact.
But right now, I mean, there's an almost complete divorce between the rhetoric of the president and the actual policy, and you have all of these freelancers in the administration running around like Nikki Haley, where you wonder if the president cleared off on her words today. But you also have these powerful players, like today, for example, we saw this inside the Beltway intrigue with Steve Bannon being demoted from his position at the National Security Council, but nevertheless retaining his security clearance, retaining his entree to the Oval Office, and so presumably free to pursue his own policy. And then none of this even touches somebody like Jared Kushner, who is the shadow Secretary of State. I mean, it's stunning how
he doesn't speak to anyone.
He doesn't speak to anybody, but he supposedly has the portfolio of Canada, Mexico, the Middle East, China, and reorganizing government. He's supposed to be doing all of this stuff. So what is Rex Tillerson supposed to be doing? What is H.R. McMaster supposed to be doing? You have all these people who report directly to the president, who are not in the organizational chart, who are not in the normal national security process, but they have tremendous power. I mean, who has more power in this White House than the president's son-in-law? He probably has more power than any previous advisor going back 50 years, and he's probably less qualified to exercise that power than any previous advisor going back 50 years. So I do feel to some extent for people like Rex Tillerson and others, because they're in a very tough position, because they've clearly been outmaneuvered by these people inside the White House, in the White House, who are jockeying for power. That's where the real struggle is going on, and increasingly Rex Tillerson feels like he's very peripheral to it. He's not at the center of the decision making.
Got to take a break.
You know,
here.
the odd thing, Lawrence,
go ahead, David, quickly.
Quick point is, you know, they're jockeying for power, but they're not fighting over policy. Often they fight over policy in White Houses, but in this case, it's just for who gets the most influence.
It sounded like Nikki Haley was fighting over policy today. We're going to have to take a break here. David Corn, Max Boot, thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Coming up, Donald Trump took his distraction strategy to a new level today, accusing someone else of committing a crime. Not Barack Obama this time, but someone close to Barack Obama. And the president, who boldly bragged about sexual assault on video and audio tape, is now defending Bill O'Reilly, saying that Bill O'Reilly did nothing wrong. And you know what? That may be true. Donald Trump probably thinks there is nothing wrong with sexual harassment.
Tonight on All In.
I do change, and I am flexible, and I'm proud of that flexibility.
Bannon is out at NSC.
It's not only not going to get better, it's going to get worse every day.
The ex-Breitbart publisher removed from the National Security Council as the president does some high-stakes ad-libbing on foreign policy.
My attitude toward Syria and Assad has changed.
Tonight, the White House shakeup with Senator Chris Murphy and Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Then, as advertisers flee from the factor, caution. President Trump defends O'Reilly, saying, quote, "I don't think Bill did anything wrong."
First of all, locker room talk.
Rebecca Traister and Erin Gloria Ryan are here to respond. Plus, Senator Tim Kaine on the Democrats' fight to stop Neil Gorsuch, and Congressman Eric Swalwell on today's hearings on the Trump-Russia probe. When All In starts right now.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. A lot to get to tonight, including a remarkable presidential press conference that we'll get to in just a moment. But we begin tonight with news that President Trump has removed his controversial chief strategist, the website publisher Steve Bannon, from his permanent seat on the National Security Council, which is the nation's primary policymaking group on national security. Trump's initial decision to put Bannon on the NSC's Principals Committee, despite the fact he is a political operative with no national security experience other than his time in the Navy, was widely criticized as reflecting a politicization of foreign policy, particularly since actual national security officials were given reduced roles. The Trump administration today insisted Bannon was not being demoted.
So it's not a demotion for Steve Bannon?
Well, not for Steve, not for Tom. These are very highly valued members of this administration. They're going to continue to play important policy roles. But I think with H.R. McMaster's addition as our national security advisor, a man of extraordinary background in the military, this is just a natural evolution.
The Tom reference there is Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, who was also downgraded along with Bannon. The White House spin today on Bannon's removal was pretty exceptional, even by their standards, and it included a claim that Bannon had only been placed on the NSC in the first place as a check on former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. With Flynn, of course, having resigned in disgrace after lying to the vice president about the nature of his conversations with the Russian ambassador, Bannon could move on. A source close to Bannon even telling NBC News that Bannon believes his role in the NSC reflects just another job done for the president. Think about this. The White House today is saying it needed a far-right website publisher to babysit its now disgraced national security advisor on matters of foreign policy. And now that that man is gone, Flynn, and offering to testify in exchange for immunity, well, mission accomplished. Never mind that this all happened 6 weeks after Flynn left. Bannon's ouster was orchestrated by Flynn's replacement, H.R. McMaster, who the vice president referred to, who has now added the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the National Intelligence Director back onto that Principals Committee, where they had been in the previous administration. But make no mistake, Steve Bannon still has the president's ear, as well as the highest security clearance in the West Wing, at a particularly sensitive time in foreign policy, with the administration facing a string of incredibly difficult, fraught, nuanced, high-stakes, life-and-death issues across the globe. In the wake of a ballistic missile launch yesterday by an increasingly bellicose North Korea, Trump is set to start meetings tomorrow at Mar-a-Lago with Chinese President Xi Jinping, after having told the Financial Times, quote, "If China is not going to solve North Korea, we will." Those meetings were orchestrated in large part by Trump's son-in-law, the 36-year-old Jared Kushner, who, like Bannon and the president, has zero national security policy experience, but nonetheless has a huge national security portfolio, and this week participated in high-level meetings in Iraq. And then, of course, there's the horrific scene in Syria, where activists say the chemical weapons attack yesterday killed roughly 100 people, including 25 children. Before it took place, the Trump administration had repeatedly said it is not seeking to oust Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who's widely believed to have been responsible for that chemical weapons attack. But at a news conference in the Rose Garden today with King Abdullah of Jordan, Trump seemed to indicate he had reversed course, though, as is so often the case, it was hard to know whether or not he was articulating policy or simply speaking off the cuff.
I will tell you that attack on children yesterday had a big impact on me. Big impact. That was a horrible, horrible thing. And I've been watching it and seeing it, and it doesn't get any worse than that. And I have that flexibility, and it's very, very possible. And I will tell you, it's already happened, that my attitude toward Syria and Assad has changed very much.
would not explain how exactly the U.S. would respond and dodge when pressed on specifics. And while he again blamed the Obama administration for yesterday's attack, he added that going forward, he would be accountable.
I now have responsibility, and I will have that responsibility and carry it very proudly. I will tell you that.
Joining me now, Senator Chris Murphy, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, did you understand the president to be announcing a policy change in Syria today?
I don't think anybody has any clue what he meant today. He seemed to be going through his thought process over the past 24 hours, but we can't understand whether he is suggesting a massive upgrade in U.S. presence or military activity in Syria or a downgrade. All he told us is that his thoughts have changed. And listen, it's consistent with this administration's conduct over the course of the first 75 days. Nobody really has any clue about what the red lines or green lines for this administration are. The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump was actually right in 2013 when he opposed plans to drop bombs inside Syria. It was a bad idea then, and it's a bad idea now. Assad is on the march. He controls 80% of that country's territory, and dropping some ordnance on him won't change the reality of the battle space down below.
Wait a second.
So to the extent he's...
Well, I want to challenge you on that a bit, right? I mean, the idea, so the thing that you see a lot of people say, and this is across the ideological spectrum, I will say, the former president enunciated a red line with chemical weapons because of their specific horror, the specific historical resonance, the specificity of the international norm against them. That red line was crossed. There was no actual repercussions, partly because Republicans in Congress refused to vote to authorize, we should note, but that represented a sort of reduction in American credibility in the region and in Syria. We have now seen that red line crossed again. You don't think we should be responding to that?
So, no, listen, I think to the extent that you have created an expectation that there is going to be a military attack after a usage of certain type of weapon, you probably should follow through on that threat. What I'm suggesting is that by dropping bombs in the Middle East, you may live up to a promise that you've made, but you are going to make the situation on the ground worse for the citizens and civilians inside Syria, not better. So, yeah, if you've made a promise as a leader, you probably should follow through on that promise. And what is so confusing about what Trump said today is that he may have made a promise, he may have drawn a red line, but he may have not.
What does it mean? So in healthcare, we saw the healthcare fight happen, and it was fairly evident the President of the United States didn't have tremendous command of the details of healthcare policy. I don't think that's an unfair or uncharitable reading of what he had to say on it. That seemed to be the case today in the Rose Garden. Even a basic question about Iran-backed fighters in Syria and Hezbollah, he did not seem to understand. What does it do? What does it mean that there's this ambiguity around what exactly United States policy is as a unified entity in the world on crucial issues?
Well, listen, I think one of the reasons they pulled the health care bill was that they realized when members were getting in the room with Donald Trump that they were getting closer to no, not yes, because he actually couldn't persuade them on the merits. And it certainly creates confusion around the world as to what action by a foreign power will cause in terms of an American reaction. But when you think ahead to the summit with the Chinese leader, that inability to grasp the details of policy really takes away your ability to cut a deal, to influence somebody sitting across the table from you. So without that grasp of specifics, it makes our foreign policy really hard to understand, but it also should lower our expectations for what we are going to get out of these bilateral meetings.
I have to say, it also seems like a recipe for getting rolled, frankly. I mean, in any negotiation, if you don't have command of the details.
Well, and the details when it comes to our trade-offs with China are about as as detailed as you get, right? These are complicated economic interactions. The reality of what they may promise versus what they may actually deliver when it comes to pushback on North Korea is also very much down in the weeds. So, yeah, this is certainly an invitation to get a bad deal when you're sitting down with leaders who know the book much better than you.
All right, Senator Chris Murphy, thank you.
Thank you.
Joining me now, Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California. And Congresswoman, I'd like your response to the news about Steve Bannon today, someone that you have been an outspoken critic of. What do you make of the developments today that he's been removed from the Principals Committee of the National Security Council?
Well, basically, I think it's a move that only they know why they have done it. I don't trust anything they say. You can bet your bottom dollar that Bannon is still going to be close to the president. He'll be whispering in his ear whether or not he's sitting on the National Security Council or not. And so I don't believe that he's been removed because somehow they don't want his input. And that excuse that he gave by being there to babysit and watch Flynn is flimsy. And it doesn't make good sense. So we can just throw out whatever it is the president has said, and it will show up later on that we've been misled one more time.
Yeah, how do you, you just said something that strikes me as important, that you just don't believe anything coming out of the White House. And
yes.
I don't think that's necessarily broadly applied across both parties, but I do think there is a credibility problem. How do you conduct yourself as a member of the United States Congress in interactions with that branch of government when you feel that you cannot literally trust anything they say?
Well, we actually are having a very difficult time. If you take a look at the negotiations that went around the ACA and trying to figure out exactly where they were coming from and what they were wanted to do on health care. All we know is that it was a circular firing squad inside the Republican conference. We're not able to do any more with the president than they're able to do within their own conference. Actually, very few people up here, I think, really believe him. He's not trusted. He doesn't really have the credibility. The Los Angeles Times did a striking article on him. There's a 4-part series that they're doing that basically talks about this lack of trust, this lack of confidence, and about his lying. And so we don't have that kind of relationship where we're really negotiating and we can believe or disbelieve him. We're just far apart.
America has been involved in a ceaseless state of war since 2001. Afghanistan, in which we still have troops in harm's way, is the longest war in the history of the American Republic. Did you get nervous today watching the president talk about something as freighted, high stakes, and violent as the Middle East when he was the language he was using today?
Well, I get nervous anytime I hear the president talk about foreign affairs. I get nervous when he denies to shake the hand of one of our strongest allies. I get nervous when he tries to bluff the president of China. I get nervous when he basically does not know what he's talking about. You know, this is a president who didn't go to the briefings. He didn't have time to listen to the experts talk about what is happening in the world and on foreign affairs. So I don't want him really speaking for the United States. You know, you heard something today about him taking a different attitude on Assad in Syria. Well, what is that? Is that American policy? Did he make it up on the spot? Does he know what he's talking about? No, he doesn't. And so I think it's a mistake for us to believe that somehow he's going to ever be able to engage in diplomacy, that he's going to be able to work out ways that we can stay out of war. And so I have no trust and no confidence in him. And I really wish that there was some way we could rein him in. I wish that our foreign affairs experts could somehow get his ear and at least tell him to shut up, to just stop it.
I want to ask you about something the president said today on the record in the Oval Office about Bill O'Reilly, an individual who had said some offensive things, in my opinion, about you and sort of apologized for it, but then redoubled his attack on you. Mr. O'Reilly faces multiple allegations of sexual harassment, numerous settlements on that score, outstanding ones as well. The president saying this of